It was a quiet morning on Earth when the first signs of humanity's extinction began to take shape. Earth had lived in peace for centuries. Nations were thriving, technological advancement soared, and humanity was on the verge of interstellar exploration. But what no one expected was the sudden arrival of a force far beyond anything they had ever encountered. In the far reaches of the galaxy, a race known as the Va Koth had been watching Earth from the shadows. They had watched humanity evolve, watched as humans built towering cities, crafted sophisticated weapons, and waged wars against one another. They saw potential, a species with the intelligence and ingenuity to challenge their own supremacy. And the Va Koth were not a race that tolerated threats. When the Va Koth launched their invasion, they did so with devastating efficiency. Their fleet arrived without warning, overwhelming Earth's defenses in mere hours. Cities were obliterated by orbital bombardments, and humanity's military was powerless against their alien technology. The invaders were unstoppable, seemingly invincible. Within days, Earth was gripped by the terror of total annihilation. At the heart of the chaos, a handful of humans refused to go quietly into extinction. In the ruins of a shattered New York City, a small group of survivors found themselves huddled together in a hidden underground bunker. They were scientists, soldiers, and ordinary civilians, an unlikely coalition that shared one thing in common: the will to survive. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Marks, a renowned biologist who had spent her career studying the limits of human endurance. In the face of destruction, her mind raced for answers. The Va Koth were known for their precision and ruthlessness, but they had overlooked one crucial detail: the human spirit. "There's something they don't understand," Dr. Marks muttered, pacing back and forth in the dimly lit bunker. "We're not just a species of survivalists. We're adapters. We evolve in the face of adversity." Her words didn't go unnoticed. Among the group was Captain Jack Reynolds, a battle-hardened officer who had led humanity's defense forces before the Va Koth onslaught. He had seen countless soldiers fall, but he hadn't lost his faith in humanity's ability to push back. He trusted Dr. Marks, not just because of her intellect, but because she understood the resilience embedded in the very fabric of human nature. "We've been knocked down," Jack said, his voice steady. "But we're still standing. The Va Koth made a mistake. They underestimated us." The others nodded in agreement. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of their species. For the first time since the invasion, hope flickered in their hearts. But they knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough to defeat an empire as ruthless and powerful as the Va Koth. Dr. Marks turned to the group. "We need to learn everything we can about the Va Koth. Their technology, their weaknesses, their strategies. And we need to do it fast." The survivors began to work tirelessly, pooling their knowledge and resources to uncover anything that could give humanity a fighting chance. Dr. Marks focused on studying the biology of the Va Koth, looking for signs of vulnerability in their physiology. Captain Reynolds organized a small team of elite soldiers to scout for any surviving resistance groups. Together, they formed a plan to launch a counteroffensive. Days turned into weeks, and the humans' understanding of their enemies began to grow. They discovered that the Va Koth were not just technologically superior, they were biologically engineered for conquest. Their bodies were designed to adapt rapidly to any environment, making them formidable opponents. But humanity had one advantage that the Va Koth did not: the ability to think outside the box. As the group's research continued, they uncovered a key vulnerability in the Va Koth's central command structure. The aliens' hive-like mentality made them reliant on a central network that linked their ships and forces. If they could disrupt this network, they could cripple the Va Koth's ability to coordinate their attacks. It was a slim hope, but it was a start. Late one night, as Dr. Marks worked in the bunker's makeshift laboratory, she received a transmission. It was encrypted, but the source was unmistakable: another survivor group had found a potential way to infiltrate the Va Koth's central command. With newfound resolve, Dr. Marks and Captain Reynolds convened with the others. The path to humanity's survival was uncertain, but for the first time since the invasion began, they had a plan, a chance. They weren't going to go down without a fight. "We may be outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched," Captain Reynolds said, his voice resolute. "But we're human. And that means we have one thing the VA Koth will never understand, our will to survive." And so, the first glimmer of humanity's resistance was born. A small group, banded together by their shared will to fight back against extinction, had set the stage for a war that would become the defining struggle of their species. The VA Koth would soon learn that they had made a grave mistake by underestimating the resilience of the unbreakable species, humanity. The days that followed were a blur of activity, as Dr. Marks and Captain Reynolds worked tirelessly with the survivors to put their plan into motion. They had uncovered a vulnerability in the VA Kotha's network, but to exploit it, they needed information, precise, real-time intelligence about the VA Kotha's operations and their central command. The survivors had access to an old military satellite network, a relic from the pre-invasion days, but it was heavily damaged. The system could still be used for basic communication, but it required manual repairs and reprogramming, tasks that the group would need days, if not weeks, to complete. Time, however, was a luxury they didn't have. The VA Koth were advancing, taking more cities, and pushing humanity closer to the brink of total extinction. Captain Reynolds stood at the operations table, studying the holographic map of Earth's remaining territories. Every city, every town, every military base was marked with a red dot, the places that had fallen, or soon would. The map was a grim reminder of just how far the VA Kotha's reach had extended. He clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the table's edge. He could feel the pressure of every human life that depended on their next move. "We can't wait," Jack said, his voice cold with determination. "We need to act now." Dr. Marks stepped forward, her mind racing through the data they had gathered. The VA Koth had a central command vessel, a massive ship known as the Tyrax, stationed in Earth's orbit. From there, they controlled all military movements and coordinated their invasions. Disrupting the Tyrax's systems was their best chance at crippling the VA Koth war machine. But infiltrating the Tyrax wasn't going to be easy. The ship was heavily guarded by both advanced technology and VA Koth soldiers, whose biology was adapted for extreme combat situations. A direct assault was out of the question. The team would need to be stealthy, cunning, and precise. They decided on a risky move: infiltrate the Tyrax using a specialized infiltration team, equipped with newly developed cloaking technology. The group would launch from a hidden military base in the Australian outback, using underground tunnels and covert transport to avoid detection. Their objective was simple: breach the Tyrax's network and plant a virus that would disrupt its central systems. The mission was dangerous. Even with their technological advantage, the VA Kotha's vigilance and ruthless tactics meant that any slip-up could lead to utter failure. But there was no turning back. Reynolds picked his team carefully. They were the best of the best, trained soldiers with nerves of steel. Among them was Lieutenant Mara Silva, an expert in sabotage and infiltration, and Sergeant Quinn Hayes, a communications specialist who had worked on Earth's most classified projects before the invasion. Each member had their role, and every skill was vital. As the team prepared, Dr. Marks provided them with the last pieces of intelligence they needed: the exact coordinates of the Tyrax's orbital pattern, and the route they would take to approach it undetected. In the days leading up to the mission, tensions ran high. The team worked around the clock, making final checks on their equipment and training in the most extreme conditions they could simulate. The air was thick with the weight of the task ahead. The survival of humanity rested on their shoulders. Then, the day came. The team gathered in the dimly lit underground hangar, the only sound the soft hum of machinery as their transport shuttle powered up. Each soldier was clad in adaptive armor, designed to blend into their surroundings and withstand the harshest of conditions. The cloaking devices were ready. It was the only chance they had. Success or failure would be determined within the next few hours. "We stick together," Captain Reynolds said as he gave one last look to his team. "We get in, we plant the virus, and we get out. No heroes, no exceptions." They nodded in unison, the weight of their responsibility clear in their eyes. As they boarded the shuttle, they knew that the mission was far more than just an attack on a ship. It was the first tangible act of resistance against the VA Koth, the spark that could ignite a galaxy-wide rebellion. The shuttle launched into the sky, disappearing into the night. As it ascended toward the heavens, the survivors below watched in silence, knowing that humanity's fate rested on the courage of those who had defied the odds. The battle had only just begun. But for the first time since the invasion, humanity's hope for survival was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was taking flight. The shuttle's ascent was smooth, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop to the nervous tension that gripped Captain Reynolds and his team. They had trained for this moment for weeks, but nothing could truly prepare them for the reality of their mission. As the shuttle cleared Earth's atmosphere, the cold vacuum of space stretched out before them, and they were headed straight toward the VA Koth flagship, the Tyrax. Lieutenant Mara Silva, a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, monitored the cloaking system. The cloaking device was a prototype, something the survivors had managed to cobble together from scavenged alien tech and human ingenuity. It could hide them from most sensors, but not from all of them. The team would need to rely on their training and stealth to slip past the VA Kotha's defenses. Activating cloaking in 3, 2, 1, Mara muttered, her fingers flying across the console. The shuttle flickered, its form becoming translucent and blending with the void of space. For all intents and purposes, it was invisible. Yet, the silence in the cabin was anything but comforting. They all knew that, one wrong move, one slight glitch in the cloaking system, and they would be discovered. Captain Reynolds took his seat at the front, eyes narrowed as he watched the flashing trajectory markers. The Tyrax was approaching, its massive silhouette slowly growing in size. The ship was like a floating city, an iron behemoth with weapons and technology beyond anything Earth had ever known. "We're going to have to slip in under their radar," Sergeant Quinn Hayes said, breaking the silence. He was in charge of communications, and his job was to make sure the team could stay in contact and, if possible, disrupt the VA Kotha's own systems from within. "We'll need to disable their comms, at least temporarily. That'll buy us time." "Understood," Reynolds replied. He wasn't a man of many words, but he trusted his team more than anyone. "Just make sure it doesn't buy us a one-way ticket." The shuttle continued to glide toward the Tyrax, a silent predator in the vastness of space. The closer they got, the more Captain Reynolds could feel the weight of the mission. Failure wasn't an option. If they couldn't disable the VA Kotha's systems, Earth's remaining resistance would have no hope. They would be utterly crushed. Finally, they were in position. The Tyrax loomed large in front of them, the main hangar bay glowing faintly with activity. They had timed this perfectly. According to their intel, the VA Koth were in the midst of a fleet-wide reorganization. The hangar was being used to process ships and supply routes, meaning there would be fewer guards and less security. "We're going in," Reynolds ordered. The shuttle descended toward the Tyrax's lower docking bay, cloaking systems still working flawlessly. As the shuttle neared the entrance, Mara ran her final checks, her fingers moving with quick precision. 30 seconds to dock," she said, her voice tight. Captain Reynolds stood, his eyes locked onto the shimmering silhouette of the massive hangar door. It was a perfect match for the intel they had received. They had trained for this, but the reality of the mission was nothing like the simulation. "Everyone, stay sharp," he said, his voice firm. "Once we're inside, we move fast. No hesitation." The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper, the thrusters engaged for a soft landing. The cloaking device flickered briefly, then stabilized. The team had arrived. Silence descended as the door to the shuttle opened with a hiss, and the team disembarked. They were in the heart of the Tyrax. Their mission was clear: disable the central communications array, plant the virus into the core system, and make their way out before they were discovered. But as they moved deeper into the hangar, Captain Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, oppressive. He gestured for the team to move silently, their boots barely making a sound against the cold metallic floor. Lieutenant Silva led the way, her movements fluid and calculated. She stopped at the corner of a large storage bay and signaled for the others to follow. As they moved into position, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the darkened corridors of the ship. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. The Vakoth were nearby. "Stay low," Reynolds whispered. "We can't afford to be detected yet." The team pressed against the walls, weapons drawn, as the Vakoth patrol passed just a few meters away. The aliens moved with mechanical precision, their glowing eyes scanning the shadows. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire team had been spotted, but the Vakoth didn't pause. They continued their patrol, unaware of the human infiltrators hidden just beyond their reach. Once the patrol passed, the team exhaled collectively, the tension lifting just a fraction. They continued their advance, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the Tyrax. Mara tapped her communicator. "Approaching the central hub. I can see the network access terminal." "Good," Reynolds said, his voice steady. "We're almost there." But as they neared the access point, the silence was shattered by an alarm. The cloaking system had failed. "Move!" Reynolds shouted, as the red lights of the alert flashed across the walls. The mission had just gone from covert to a desperate race for survival. The sound of the alarm was like a thunderclap in the silence of the Tyrax. Red lights flickered to life across the vast corridors of the alien ship, bathing everything in a blood-red glow. The soft hum of the ship's systems now pulsed in frantic urgency, and Captain Reynolds felt his pulse race in sync with the alarms. "Cloaking failure," Mara Silva growled, her fingers flying over the control panel. "It's scrambling. I can't get it back online." "Doesn't matter now," Reynolds barked, his voice calm but sharp. "We've been compromised. Plan B, move, move, move." Without another word, he gestured for the team to advance. The central network terminal, their primary target, was just ahead, but now the entire ship knew they were there. The shadows that had once hidden their presence now seemed to stretch and close in on them. The Tyrax's immense corridors were filled with the echoes of the Vakoth's patrols. Their heavy steps resonated as the alien forces mobilized to track down the intruders. Sergeant Quinn Hayes, the communications expert, was already focused on the next critical step. "I'll get the virus into the system. If we can't take out the whole ship, we'll at least buy some time," he muttered, his voice determined. "I need a minute to break through their firewalls." "Then you've got 30 seconds, Captain Reynolds shot back as the team reached a large bulkhead. He raised his weapon and checked the map on his wrist device. "We're close to the central hub, but the corridor's going to get crowded fast. Silva, you take point." Lieutenant Silva nodded, crouching low and moving like a shadow along the walls. The rest of the team followed closely, their weapons at the ready, scanning every corner, every shadow. The pounding of footsteps grew louder, more distinct. Suddenly, the corridor ahead filled with the angular forms of Vakoth soldiers. They moved in perfect synchronization, their alien eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Their weapons gleamed with deadly energy, ready to destroy anything that threatened their invasion. "We've got company," Mara hissed, crouching behind a stack of crates. She peered around the edge, eyes narrowing. 5, no, 6 of them. We won't make it past them without a fight." Captain Reynolds had no illusions. Fighting was inevitable now. "Hayes, start the breach," he commanded. "The rest of you, form up." With that, the team spread out, taking cover behind whatever they could find in the cluttered corridor. Reynolds motioned for Mara to engage, and without hesitation, she raised her weapon, an advanced pulse rifle that had been scavenged from Vakoth wreckage. She fired once, a sharp, crackling shot that hit one of the Vakoth square in the chest, knocking it back with a violent jolt. The Vakoth soldiers immediately responded, their energy weapons flashing as they fired at the humans' positions. The team ducked and returned fire, each shot carefully placed to take down an enemy without wasting a single bullet. Mara's rifle hummed as she fired in quick succession, striking another soldier in the shoulder. It crumpled to the ground, its body twitching in death. "Go, go, go!" Reynolds shouted, pushing forward as the team advanced. Sergeant Hayes wasn't waiting for permission. As the firefight raged, he dove toward the central network terminal, moving with precision. His fingers flew over the control panel, each keystroke designed to force the virus into the system. The seconds stretched into eternity as enemy fire whizzed past, barely missing him. "Virus is uploading," Hayes shouted, his voice laced with both relief and urgency. 5 seconds to detonation. But even as the countdown began, more VA-Koth soldiers flooded the corridor. They were everywhere now, emerging from doorways, dropping down from hidden alcoves. The soldiers' pale, insectoid forms seemed to move with unnatural speed. Their weapons lashed out, firing in all directions, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burnt ozone. "We need to fall back," Mara called out, ducking as another burst of fire slammed into the wall above her head. "Negative," Reynolds snapped. "We're not leaving without the virus being fully deployed." The system's countdown was ticking away. The virus was designed to disrupt the Tyrax's internal communications, severing its command link to the rest of the VA-Koth fleet. It was a simple plan, but it would be devastating. If they could cripple the ship's internal systems, the VA-Koth would lose their ability to coordinate and mount a proper defense. The humans might have a chance. But the countdown was reaching zero, and their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. "Let's go, Hayes," Reynolds barked, turning toward the corridor ahead. "We move now or we die here." With the virus now embedded in the ship's core, the team started their retreat, pushing through the growing ranks of VA-Koth soldiers. It was a chaotic scramble as they sprinted down the narrow passageways, blurring through fire, smoke, and confusion. The loud bang of an explosion sounded behind them. Part of the Tyrax's internal systems had started to break down, triggering a chain reaction. The ship was beginning to fall apart. "Fire in the hole!" Hayes yelled, ducking behind a corner as the ship's entire communication network started to collapse in on itself. The Tyrax began to shudder, its walls shaking as the virus activated. The ship's defenses faltered. No longer able to communicate with the rest of the VA-Koth forces, the Tyrax's military units became disorganized and panicked. But this wasn't the end. The Tyrax was still a fortress, and the team was still far from safety. "We're not done yet," Reynolds shouted. "Keep moving." The team rushed through the ship's labyrinthine halls, weaving through a now chaotic and disarrayed VA-Koth fleet. The sense of danger was palpable, the stench of fear creeping into every footstep. But there was something else in the air now: hope. They had done it. They had struck the VA-Koth at their very heart. And no matter what came next, humanity had shown them that they were unbreakable. The chaos within the Tyrax escalated as the virus spread like wildfire, shutting down key systems and scrambling the VA-Koth's once impervious network. The ship trembled as explosions rocked its interior, the once steady hum of its engines now replaced by a series of sharp metallic groans. The alien forces, caught in a disorganized panic, struggled to regain control. Despite their success in planting the virus, Captain Reynolds knew they couldn't afford to stay and watch the Tyrax crumble. Their exit was just as important as the mission itself. The team had breached the ship, carried out the sabotage, and now they needed to leave before the VA-Koth regrouped and launched a counterattack. "Get to the shuttle," Reynolds barked, his voice tight with urgency. "We've overstayed our welcome." The team was already moving, their eyes scanning the damaged ship for signs of movement. The corridors that had once been meticulously clean and orderly were now in disarray. Electrical sparks arced from exposed wires, and the red emergency lights cast an eerie glow over the scene. The VA-Koth soldiers, now scattered and vulnerable, were no longer the coordinated force they had been. But that didn't mean they were defenseless. Mara Silva led the way, her rifle held steady as she took point, her sharp eyes scanning every darkened corner. She'd always been the fastest, the quietest, the most calculating member of the team. But even she couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that had begun to creep into her chest. The Tyrax was collapsing, and every second they spent here increased the chances of being trapped inside its decaying walls. The rest of the team followed, their movements swift but careful. As they neared the docking bay where their shuttle awaited, a distant explosion shook the corridor, sending debris raining down on them. The sound of the blast echoed like thunder. "We need to hurry," Sergeant Hayes muttered, his face pale. He had been working the communications console earlier, but now his thoughts were consumed with the same sense of urgency that gripped everyone else. Ahead, the shuttle lay in wait, cloaked and silent, hidden in the shadows of the bay. They were almost there. And then, disaster struck. From the shadows of a side passage, a squad of VA Koth soldiers appeared, their glowing eyes fixed on the retreating humans. They hadn't given up the hunt, not by a long shot. They moved with inhuman precision, their weapons raised, ready to annihilate the intruders. "Take cover!" Reynolds shouted, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. The shuttle was within sight, but they were still too far from safety. A direct fight was their only option now. The team dove for cover behind whatever they could find, crates, maintenance equipment, even the walls themselves. The VA Koth advanced with cold, relentless efficiency, their energy weapons flashing as they fired. Captain Reynolds held his ground, his pulse racing as he sighted his rifle. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the tension of knowing that every shot was a matter of life or death. He fired first, his round hitting a VA Koth soldier square in the chest. The alien crumpled to the floor in a twitching heap. "Keep them pinned down," Reynolds shouted. "Hayes, get the shuttle systems active. We need to launch now." Sergeant Hayes didn't hesitate. His fingers were already at the console, his face grim as he worked furiously to bring the shuttle systems online. The VA Koth returned fire, their shots ricocheting off the walls around them. Each blast brought them closer to the human team. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone. Almost there, Hayes gritted out, sweat pouring down his face. Just a few more seconds. Mara popped out from behind cover, her rifle barking as she picked off another VA Koth soldier. The alien staggered, but the remaining soldiers pressed on, relentless in their pursuit. The team couldn't hold out forever. "Move!" Captain Reynolds shouted, throwing himself into the line of fire as he sprinted toward the shuttle. His team followed suit, cutting down the remaining soldiers as they advanced. With a final burst of effort, Hayes slammed his hand down on the shuttle's control panel. The engines roared to life, the metallic doors of the shuttle opening wide to reveal their escape. "Go, go, go!" Reynolds shouted, ushering everyone into the ship. The team rushed aboard, their adrenaline peaking as the shuttle's doors slammed shut behind them. The hull vibrated as the shuttle lifted off, its thrusters kicking into high gear. As they ascended into space, the team watched through the viewport as the Tyrax, the flagship of the VA Koth, shuddered and began to break apart. Fires raged along its surface, and pieces of the massive ship were torn free, floating away like debris. The virus had done its job, but it had come at a heavy cost. "Did we do it?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She stared at the wreckage of the Tyrax with a strange mix of awe and disbelief. "We did," Reynolds answered, though his voice was laced with a somber finality. "But it wasn't without a price." They had struck a devastating blow to the VA Koth, but they hadn't come out unscathed. The team had lost precious time, and their escape had been narrowly executed. The Tyrax's destruction was just one victory in a much larger war. But it was a victory nonetheless. The team settled into the shuttle seats, their bodies battered but their spirits high. They had survived. They had achieved the impossible. But they knew it wasn't over. The VA Koth would retaliate. The war was far from won. But one thing had become undeniably clear: humanity wasn't going down without a fight. No matter what the VA Koth threw at them, the human spirit was unbreakable. And that was something the aliens would soon learn. The shuttle's engines hummed with a deep, steady rhythm as it glided silently through space, leaving the shattered remains of the Tyrax in their wake. Outside the viewport, the debris field glittered like stardust, a testament to the destruction they had wrought. Captain Reynolds stared out at the wreckage, his jaw clenched, his thoughts consumed by the weight of the mission's success. "We did it, but we've only just started," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Despite their victory, the victory felt hollow, unfinished. Earth had struck a blow to the VA Koth, but the war was far from over. "All systems are stable, Captain," Lieutenant Mara Silva said, her voice cutting through the silence. She was seated at the control panel, eyes flicking between the ship's readings, ensuring their safe return. "We're out of immediate danger. I've initiated the jump to the rendezvous point." "Good," Reynolds replied. His mind was still focused on the broader battle. What they had done would send ripples through the VA Kotha's command structure. But would it be enough to shift the balance of the war? "We've crippled one ship," Sergeant Hayes said from his seat, wiping his brow. He looked back at the rest of the team, who were slumped in exhaustion, catching their breath. "But we know there are more of them, right? And they'll be pissed." Reynolds nodded slowly. Hayes was right. The VA Koth had already been testing humanity's limits, but now, they would be angrier, more determined than ever. If Earth had any hope of surviving, it needed to strike back harder and faster. But this small victory, this mission, was a critical first step. The shuttle's engines powered down as it approached its destination, an old, abandoned research station on the edge of the solar system. The perfect place to regroup, to plan their next move, and to prepare for the inevitable retaliation. As they docked with the station, Captain Reynolds stood and motioned for the team to follow. "Let's move. We've got a lot to discuss." Inside the station's command center, the team gathered around a holographic table, the dim light casting sharp shadows across their tired faces. Maps and data points flickered into life, outlining the VA Kotha's known fleets and military infrastructure. Despite their success, the reality of their situation was grim. The VA Koth had occupied a vast portion of human space, their forces overwhelming in number and technological superiority. "We need to capitalize on our success," Reynolds said, voice steady but urgent. This, he pointed to the fragmented map of the Tyrax, now a blazing star in the distance, was the first real crack in their armor. "We disrupt them now, while they're vulnerable. If we don't, they'll reorganize, retaliate, and we'll be back at square one." "Retaliation is going to be inevitable," Silva added, her eyes scanning the data on the table. "We need to be prepared for the worst. The VA Koth don't take these kinds of hits lightly. They'll come for us with everything they've got." "Which is why we need allies," Reynolds said. "We've proven we can hit them. Now we need to bring others to our cause." The rest of the team exchanged glances, each of them understanding the depth of what this meant. Humanity couldn't face this war alone. It was time to make contact with the other races that had been subjugated by the VA Koth, those who had been waiting for someone to spark the fight for freedom. "I'll start making the calls," Sergeant Hayes said, already pulling up the communication grid on his console. "There are a few old contacts we might still be able to reach. It's going to be a hard sell, but if we can get a unified front, we might have a chance." Reynolds gave a firm nod. "Do what you can. We can't afford to waste any more time." As Hayes worked to establish communications with distant resistance groups, Mara and the others continued to sift through the data on the Tyrax. The virus had done its job, but there was much more to learn. The VA Koth had hidden technology across their empire, advanced weaponry, surveillance systems, and even biological experiments. If Earth could access that technology, they might stand a chance of closing the gap between their forces and the VA Koth. Days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Hayes made contact with a handful of resistance leaders, and though their responses were guarded, the message was clear: humanity's attack on the Tyrax had sparked hope across the galaxy. Small, fragmented pockets of rebellion had been waiting for a sign, and now, they had it. The first wave of allies, Rogorians, Malathians, and even a handful of Ankai, a species known for their long-range telepathy, began to form an uneasy coalition. But Reynolds knew that the real test had only just begun. Even if they managed to rally these forces, would they be enough to take on the Va'Koth? We're not just fighting for survival, Reynolds said, pacing in the command center. We're fighting for the future of every species the Va'Koth have enslaved. We have to make them see that this is their chance for freedom, too. But we can't rely solely on hope, Silva countered, her voice blunt. This war has already cost too much. The Va'Koth are ruthless, and their retribution is going to be swift. If we don't strike first, we risk being wiped out before we ever get the chance to organize. Reynolds nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The time to plan was over. Action was required. We have our allies, he said, pausing to look each of his team members in the eye. And we have momentum. Now it's time to take the fight to the Va'Koth. The team exchanged glances, each of them knowing what this meant. Their mission had started as a desperate gambit, but now it was something far bigger, the beginning of a full-scale rebellion. The storm was coming, and humanity wasn't about to be caught unprepared. The war that had begun as a desperate, last-ditch effort by humanity had now evolved into something far larger. Earth's small, ragtag team had sparked a flame across the galaxy, lighting a fire in the hearts of every species enslaved by the Va'Koth. The coalition was growing, slowly, painfully, but it was growing. The alliance of Rogorians, Malathians, Unkai, and countless other races that had once feared the Va'Koth now had one thing in common, a shared desire for freedom. Yet, despite the victories, despite the hopeful new alliances, Captain Reynolds knew that the true test was fast approaching. The Va'Koth were not the kind of enemies to forgive and forget, and their retaliation would be swift, brutal, and unyielding. Humanity and its allies couldn't wait any longer to act. The mission now had a singular focus, to strike at the Va'Koth's homeworld and cripple their leadership once and for all. A full-scale invasion wasn't feasible, not yet, but a surgical strike at the heart of their military and political power could turn the tide of the war. We've gathered enough intel, Reynolds said as he stood before a table filled with holographic maps and tactical data. This is it. We take down their command center, we hit their war councils, and we take out their leader. If we do this, we cripple their ability to organize, and the rebellion will gain momentum. The team stood around him, their faces set in grim determination. They knew the stakes. This wasn't just another mission. This was the final push, the one that could either shatter the Va'Koth Empire or see humanity and its allies destroyed. We've prepared for this, Silva said, her voice cool but fierce. We've hit them before. We can do it again. I don't like that we're working with a deadline, Sergeant Hayes added, his eyes scanning the data. The Va'Koth know we're coming. Their defenses are going to be tighter than ever. We've got one shot at this. Reynolds nodded. It's not ideal, but we don't have time to wait. Every moment we delay, the Va'Koth consolidate their power. Our window is small, but it's there. We're taking it. The team was already aboard a specially modified transport vessel, carrying them through the outskirts of Va'Koth space, moving as stealthily as they could. A small fleet of allied ships, covert, fast, and armed with the most advanced weaponry they could muster, flanked them, ready for the mission ahead. But Reynolds knew that the real fight would take place on the ground, inside the Va'Koth homeworld's heavily fortified military district. I'll get us in close, Silva said, her fingers flying over the shuttle's controls as she piloted them toward their entry point. We're entering their atmosphere in under 30 minutes. The closer we get, the harder it'll be to stay undetected, but we'll need to make a fast drop. The clock is ticking. I'm ready, Hayes replied, his voice firm. Once we land, we'll hit the ground running. We've trained for this. In and out, no mistakes. But there was no guarantee it would go as planned. The Va'Koth had adapted since their last encounter, and Reynolds had seen enough of their capabilities to know that they wouldn't make this easy. As the shuttle descended through the layers of atmosphere, the vast cityscape of the Va'Koth homeworld stretched out below them, towering spires of metal, sleek and alien, interwoven with massive military complexes. The heart of their empire. The very thought of reaching it filled Reynolds with cold resolve. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of every species under the Vakatha's boot. They landed in a narrow, hidden alleyway near the target site, and the team immediately disembarked, weapons drawn. The area was eerily quiet. The streets of the Vakath capital, once teeming with activity, were now heavily patrolled and fortified. "We move fast," Reynolds ordered, his voice low. "No noise, no mistakes. We hit the command center, take out their leadership, and get the hell out of here." Each member of the team was a veteran of the previous battles, and the experience showed. They moved with practiced precision, gliding through the shadows, slipping past Vakath patrols, avoiding surveillance drones, and staying as invisible as possible. They knew that a single slip-up could spell their end. As they neared their target, Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. The Vakath were waiting for them, preparing for the assault. But where exactly? Mara Silva stopped, her hand raised to signal a halt. "Something's off. I've got a reading. It's too quiet." Before Reynolds could respond, an explosion ripped through the street ahead, sending a shockwave through the team. In an instant, blinding light filled the air, and enemy forces appeared from every direction, pouring out of hidden structures, surrounding them. "Ambush!" Hayes yelled, as gunfire erupted around them. They were trapped. Reynolds didn't hesitate. "Fight through it. Get to the command center." The battle was chaos. The team fought back with everything they had, firing back at the Vakath soldiers that seemed to appear from every shadow. The streets were filled with the crackling of energy weapons and the deafening sound of explosions. Mara led the charge, using her speed and agility to pick off the closest enemies, while Sergeant Hayes kept the team's communications intact, directing their movements and coordinating their strike. But despite their best efforts, they were being pushed back. The Vakath were everywhere, and their numbers were overwhelming. "Reynolds!" Mara shouted over the din of battle. "We need to move now or we're going to get overwhelmed." With a sharp nod, Reynolds motioned toward the looming structure of the Vakatha's command center. It was now or never. Through the hail of fire, the team fought their way to the heart of the Vakath Empire. When they reached the command center's doors, Reynolds keyed in the override code they'd stolen from their last mission. The door hissed open. Inside, they found what they had come for, a towering figure, the Vakath leader, his back turned, surrounded by a small army of guards. He was larger than the others, his jagged armor glinting in the low light. This was the moment. Reynolds raised his weapon. "For humanity. For every species under your thumb." The final battle had begun. The blast from Reynolds' rifle echoed through the chamber, and the Vakath leader collapsed. The team rushed forward, laying waste to the remaining guards. The ship was collapsing around them, their victory hard-earned, but the Vakatha's reign was coming to an end. As they made their escape, the Alliance, broken but resilient, had already begun to organize, their forces unified by one undeniable truth. Humanity had struck a blow to the heart of the Vakath Empire, and they would never be the same again. The unbreakable species had risen.